Great. Welcome back. In the programme, there's two sessions. Well, one is this kind of like feedback session, and the other is a panel question Q&A. What I want to do is just merge the two as we go around, as we talk. Let's just have it free flowing, and we can just go where we want to with the timings. But I will finish and make sure we finish before 3:45, if not at 3:45, because I know people have got trains to get to and stuff. So this was a two-way process. So hopefully loads of information. I mean, I'm quite buzzing. I might need to lie down for a little while because there was some fantastic information that I got. Learned loads and taken a lot back. But as I said, it was a two-way thing. So now it's a case of us also, when we put the whole pack together and bring it together for distribution for people, is that we want to know not only the information that you've been collecting from our speakers, but also what you may be doing that other people can learn from. So either anything that's come up today, because I know not all of you could have done all the sessions because there was only two that you could do. Personally, I wanted to do all three, maybe another time. So is there anything that has come up from those sessions that you'd like to share, something you want to take back, something you'd like to offer up or discuss? So I'll open it up. Go for it. Do you want to wait for the mic?
I thought the sessions were very informative, but I think there should have been a bit of scope for discussions on the table as well, because you kind of like it kind of sinks in when you discuss with your colleagues rather than having a long presentation. That's what I thought.
Okay. Cool. We can take that back. Has anyone got any? Oh, yeah.
Sorry, this is just a comment as well.
Yeah.
I think most of the two sessions I attended, they were very good. However, I think I will say that the groups that we have here have probably moved past some of the things that were discussed and are aware of many of the things that were discussed. And probably what we needed to do was delve a little deeper and sort of have discussions around, okay, this is what's happening. Okay, what's the data showing and how can we combat these specific elements? So I felt that, I guess, having a discussion around the table would have teased those out. But because it was short, so we couldn't necessarily have that. But all the same, it was very good.
Yeah, thank you. Did I see a hand go up at the back? Did I imagine that? Hopefully. Oh, there, yeah. It is now.
I'm John from NewsLH. It's a reflection and a bit of a request maybe for something that could happen going forward. In some of the presentations, we see some sort of statistics about sort of profitability of companies associated with sort of increasing when they've got a more diverse board, for example. And I just wonder whether there's anything sort of NHS-wide in terms of looking at the diversity of the board and the sort of success of an organisation. I know we can't just measure profitability, but there are objective measures we have of performance. And it'd be really useful just to see whether those messages translate into the NHS as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, important point. For those who were at Stacey's presentation, she talks about relating back, so the gain, so the performance metric. So when you've put in reverse mentoring, she's looking now as part of her research project to say you put in reverse mentoring, what's now the return on that investment? So how are you going to measure that? So it's something I think that she's working on. Haven't quite got there yet, but I think that's a really good point about, we always quote McKinsey and Boston Group and some other studies came up today, but we don't, although we show statistics about NHS finance is poorly represented on the female BAME statistics. What we don't then show, which would be very powerful, I think, is that, if you like the Qantas example, this is what happens to diverse organisations. Yeah. Does anyone have any sort of like immediate, do you know what, I'm going to go back and do this, or this is what I want to do?
So I've got a team meeting tomorrow.
Hold on, could you just wait 2 seconds for a mic? Yeah.
I've got my team meeting tomorrow, and on the agenda I'm going to have a point on unconscious bias. So I'm going to raise that at the team meeting tomorrow.
Okay. And did you learn, is there anything you're going to particularly take back or learn from that?
I think I attended the previous diversity forum, and I went back and asked people to come to future ones, and I'm still the only person that's come. So I think I'm just going to keep pressing on. Yeah. And so I think by picking up some of the points that were raised in unconscious bias, I'm hoping that I'm starting to open up some of the thinking. So if they're not going to come to the forum, then I'm going to take something back to them and get them to start thinking about it.
Okay.
So
helpful. Any more for any more? So come back to Moji's point here about, and then, you look around the room and I do recognise quite a lot of faces, and we are aware of the agenda and the conversation. And then what do you do next? So when we come to distributing the slides, we'll also be distributing a kind of summary and a sum up of each of those individual sessions, and then what that translates to in terms of a proposed sort of action plan of what people could do. So that was the purpose of today, to impart some knowledge, get some input back and feedback, and then translate that into not so much a checklist, but a sort of guidance, thought process about what you can do and what you can take back in your organisations. So if you haven't done reverse mentoring, hopefully this might kick something off. But I get your point. How do you kick that off? How do you make that happen? What's the next stage? How do you influence the leaders and stuff? So hopefully there's that. And there is our work programme as well. So I think you've got it in your pack, but I'm going to ask you again. So everyone here, we've got your email addresses. So kind of like bypassing GDPR just a little bit. We are going to assume that you'll all be happy with receiving the newsletter that we get. So that's fantastic. And then what we can do on the back of that is point you to the outcome of the Safe House discussions and stuff like that, and our action plan of where we think we will take some of this agenda, some of this conversation, and translate it into real things that people can do. So hopefully. Okay, so if there's... go for it.
Sorry, Edward. At the last conference that we had in Birmingham, there are some action that we identify in terms of having a conversation around NHS needs to be able to have targets or commit to targets on that sort of, without that senior level accountability, the numbers may not shift quickly as expected. And one of the things is that, if I remember correctly, is that we're going to continue to raise it at the highest level or wherever we could raise it. Are you able to provide update, or is it still ongoing around that agenda?
Yep, good question. So when you asked me how can we really make a big difference? So we did talk about indicators and some kind of selling point. But when we first kicked off the program 2 years ago, the first thing we did was a sponsorship program. And everyone's really keen on sponsorship. And I'll be a sponsor, and absolutely, we'll do that. And there'll be sponsees. Yes, it's a word that we made up, but it seemed to fit because we didn't have mentors and mentees. So we did the sponsees. And the problem with that was, and we picked this up from the lessons we learned from speaking to Deloitte, speaking to EY, speaking to the private sector accountancy firms. The problem we had was everyone's really keen, everyone's really engaged, wants to do it, but then the day job just takes over. And in the end, it just sort of falls flat because people don't have the time to actually follow this through in the kind of systematic way that it needs to happen. So what it kind of taught us was that actually there's a problem with the way the infrastructure around the NHS and what the accountability frameworks in the NHS. And this is what Sunday's referring to. So we wanted to change that. That was one of our primary goals. And you may be aware of, in London, there's the Going Beyond programme run by Hardib and Sandra. And the Going Beyond programme works alongside what we're doing. So what we kind of did was, about a year ago, and this is where I was mentioning earlier about the change in our one-year programme, it's slightly different now. It's split into two parts, really. One is looking at the senior band 8 and aboves, and pulling those into director and finance positions using development programs or whatever. And then there's the bit that says, well, actually, sometimes it's a case of there isn't that pool within the band 8s to be able to do that. So we need to push people from the lower bands into those positions so that when they're in the 8s, then they can be pulled into the director of finance positions and senior roles. So going beyond in London has now taken over the sort of remit of dealing with NHSI, NHSE, and talking about changing the accountability frameworks so that there is some recording of it, and we're doing more of the push stuff. That was one of my key tenets. I think there was a question earlier about what are the 3 things, if you wanted to change, what would you do? And they are kind of broader. So for me, one of them would absolutely be making organisations accountable for their statistics. Measuring it, count. Whenever I do a straw poll, we can do it now. So hands up, who measures in finance teams, who measures and tracks their diversity stats within a finance team? Yeah, 1, 2, 3. It's like an auction. Any more? 3, 4? No, going higher. And if you think about the number of people in the room, that's not great. So if we were forced to do that, or we were required to do that in an encouraging and supportive way, not in a kind of like finger-pointing way, I think that would be really good. The other one is on recruitment, and we have spoken about that. That would be another thing for me. It would absolutely be on our recruitment processes. And I was talking to Dawn, I think. Is Dawn still here? Dawn's right at the back. So at Guy's, and what they do is they've got a whole trust-wide process where they have a bank of BAME people who will then be chosen at whatever interview it is. Whoever's doing an interview will go to that bank of people, and there must be a representative on that group. So, we talk about things can be difficult to do sometimes. We always talk about, well, how can you make sure that someone from a protected characteristic applies? 2, how can you make sure your panel is representative? There are ways around this, and we'll put that into our little pack of examples and that people can connect with and people could actually look to do. So, yes, but it's with going beyond. I know that's not a perfect answer, but they are sort of dealing with that, and we'll keep chasing them on that. Yeah, Richard.
Sorry, just to piggyback on the back of that, there happens to be we've got a CFO's meeting next week, and the Going Beyond programme is one of the main agenda items on that. Right. So anyone working for a London trust, if you think there's something your organisation should be doing, your CFO, he or she will be reporting back on one of the 2 things that they are going to do in their organisation. So now is the perfect time to give them a nudge, and I'm sure they'll be happy to hear from you.
Mm-hmm. Good plug there. We'll move on to the panel session if there's not any more, because I do want to give lots of time for distinguished colleagues here to answer some questions and for me to stop talking as well. So does anyone have any? You've seen the biographies. I won't introduce, or I won't ask them to introduce themselves, because that will just use up time, and the biographies are in the packs. So you can pick up anything you want on their biography or in general. Any questions for our panel?
And the Slido as well.
Oh, yeah, and Slido. So if you logged on.
We've got 1 question on there already.
And we've got 1 question already on Slido. So Slido works, and that's great. So if you're a bit reticent, a bit shy, don't feel like asking the question, then you can use Slido. Do you want to pick up the Slido question?
Yep. So there's a question here for Arnold, and it is, what was your experiences around diversity and acceptance when you became a director, and what are your recommendations and thoughts moving forward?
Okay. Though Ed says we're not going to talk about ourselves, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, if that's okay. Can people hear me fine?
Yeah, you go for it.
So, my story is that first of all, has anybody heard about something called the Empire Windrush? Yeah. Yeah? Well, okay. Well, let's be right. I wasn't on the Empire Windrush. I'm not that old. But my parents were on something similar. So I'm a black inner city kid. I grew up in London. I went to a comprehensive school. And, being a director of a finance wasn't something that was on my horizon. But I got there eventually. Probably talk a little bit more about how I got there. But one of the things that did happen was when I first became a director of finance many years ago, I went to the first directors of finance meeting in London, and I was the only black face in the whole department, in the whole crowd. And I kind of got used to that because that's what it was then. It's not like that now. And I'm really pleased that isn't the case. And I think the NHS has moved on a long way. I mean, once upon a time, again, just put in context of the question, the NHS did have lots of people from diverse backgrounds, but they weren't in senior positions. They were in porters or they were in junior nurses. They weren't ward managers. They weren't directory managers. That's changed. So, I mean, the answer to the question, which I think, if I remember, is that it feels different now. I mean, this whole event is something that wouldn't have happened 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And really, people do have to seize the moment to move things on. Use the opportunities that this event gives. Really look and think about some of the things that have come out this morning. I mean, reverse mentoring, I like that. Because I'm actually now a coach. I do coaching. But the thing about the coaching is that you talk to people who are your level or slightly below. Reverse mentoring puts the power around the other way, and that's fantastic. So I actually think that reverse mentoring and the ability for people to actually stand up and say, this is not morally right, what's happening in terms of appointments, is a very important thing that's moved the goalposts on. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? One? Anything on
Some more questions?
Anything on Slido? Nothing on Slido yet? You're not using it, all right. Catherine?
Do you want to ask it?
You can just ask it yourself. Yeah.
So this is, I guess, to all the panel members, whoever wants to answer. So what do you think is the best way of influencing what I might term dinosaurs within the NHS management structure? To take diversity seriously and inclusion, I guess, seriously, and to make sure that they are thinking about not just employing people and promoting people and giving the best projects to and expecting people to look like them.
You want to take that?
Right, it's a difficult one, that one, really difficult. My background was in commercial work in the financial services industry. 3% of the senior management were female. There were no black people in the financial services industry when I worked there. And we're only talking about 20 years ago, so things have really had to change. I've been doing quite a lot of work around NHS hospitals, mostly Birmingham. What I've noticed is very, very few trans people turning up. So my sense at the moment, looking at things and giving an outside perspective, because I'm not working in it, is that you're not attracting trans people into employment within the NHS yet, which is odd given the relationship trans people have with the NHS. We depend desperately on you. A lot of trans people. So all of us at some stage are going to have to be accessing NHS just to help us deal with who we are. So I have found enormously poor levels of understanding. I had to go to see a psychiatrist in order to get onto the care path. I was invited to come back for a second interview. I thought, well, why? And on the second time, he said, look, I've asked you to come back because I know so little about this and you know so much. I was hoping to be able to pick your brains to help me when I do have to treat other people. I thought, this is crazy. So I think that there is a really big problem in that within the echelons of the NHS, they haven't got this diversity thing. recruitment is, I know, one of the biggest challenges, and I think one of the things that you have to do, if you think about the public sector equality duty, that equality duty says that you have to do whatever's necessary to reach the people. Now, sometimes you can't just say, I went to a meeting once in Hull, and I said, why are there no BAME people at this meeting? And so he said, we invited them and nobody came. I'm sorry, that doesn't work. If they didn't come, you have to find out. The public sector equality duty says you have to find out why no one came from those communities. Is that because they feel intimidated? Is it because they feel that they wouldn't be welcome? And that's probably the case. I know that a lot of trans people are terrified about how they're going to be treated. So sometimes you have to just get out there. So think about advertising and promoting job opportunities into those communities. And I'm not going to... it's the seldom listened to groups, not the hard to reach. Somebody called them hard to reach once in a meeting, and somebody said, your revenue department doesn't find it hard to reach me. So I think more and more, and I mean, I stood to go onto a local NHS trust, and it's all done under a very democratic basis. I noticed that the people who got elected were older white people from the community. The black people who were on the list, the Asian people on the list, the trans people on the list. None of us got enough votes because there's an inherent problem within the community that's racist, transphobic, Islamophobic, and they don't vote. So if you put something up and say, we're going to do it very democratically, no, I'm sorry, it's not democratic. If you are of a group that fundamentally the majority of people are uncomfortable with, they won't vote for you. So sometimes you have to say, no, we're going to have to select. We're going to have to look at what the balance we need for this particular board, and we need these certain number of people. So we're going to select and make sure that we have the representation. So you might have enough people applying so you can actually do it by panel and select the right people. But I think sometimes you have to think democracy actually sometimes isn't very democratic. And sometimes you just have to select so you get the right people that you want in it, and encourage people to come forward. Make sure it's clear when you do your advertising. We would particularly welcome applications from the Asian community, from the trans community, so that people know, hey, come on, we're looking for you. I'll let somebody else speak.
Okay.
I think I totally agree with what's said there. I think first of all, we need to ourselves, we need to set a good example, speak up and challenge those bad behavior, and we need to promote the diversity and inclusion on our day-to-day work, which wherever level you're at, junior staff or senior people, keep promoting the diversity and inclusion and caring about people from diverse background, hearing their views, hearing their good ideas. And then gradually people will listen, and gradually the culture of the organization will change. And I think also when you work at mid management or senior management, and it's sometimes quite important challenging your peer directors, your peers' decision making, and ask them, why don't we hear a group of people? They may have a first-hand experience. They may have a very different idea on things. Maybe, that will bring a real benefit to the organization. So I had quite a lot of those kinds of experience there in my at Newham, the previous my workplace, and also I recently moved to North West London collaboration, and there's quite a lot of focus there on the diversity, and from that we did generate bunch of good ideas and improve the organizational position a lot.
Okay.
I think you go back to what Arnold said to the previous questions. 10 years ago, we wouldn't have been sat in this room. So partly we have to celebrate how far we've already come. We're on a journey, and I agree that not the sufficient engagement at senior level that I've seen the dinosaurs, but it is down to the people in this room and the individuals who feel they have those equality characteristics to be the beacon in the workplace, to strive to be the best in their careers. I mean, disability is obviously my bag. How many disabled, well, we don't know how many disabled people are sat in this room, because obviously hidden disabilities. If we've got 18% of people anonymously declaring a disability and 3% declaring it actually on ESR, some of us don't have a choice. I can't hide my disability. I don't want to, but because of that, I feel I've got a purpose as a role model to promote that and to strive and to challenge that through, not through what I say, not through going to the board and saying, you've not got any disabled representation, you've not got enough here, but just doing, just being the best you can be in the role you can be. And slowly, maybe we will break through those barriers, but it will take time.
Well, indeed. Got a question on email. I'm going to paraphrase it, but it's the origins are around. Sometimes when we're in organisations, we don't see ourselves in the senior positions because we don't see those role models, or we don't see ourselves as a mirror on that board. You know, are they all white for me? Are they all male? Or however, we don't mirror and we don't see them. So the question was, have you ever struggled with picturing yourself in a role, despite on paper being perfectly suited to it, and how did you overcome this barrier? So this is more on an individual level. So we talked just then about organisational level. So more on an individual level, have you personally come across a situation or where you've had to go through it?
I think I could possibly share a personal experience. That was when I first stepped up as a CFO, and I was invited to a national CFO DOF conference. Perhaps my first time being that kind of event. So I walked into that room, and that was before the event officially started. So trying to have some chit chat and networking with the people, and grabbed my coffee, and it was all right. And then more and more people arrived, and I suddenly felt it's become quite difficult for me to making conversations with those people, because I don't know most of the people, and I listen to them, but they keep just. I just feel somehow I just can't act like who I usually am. And then I just looked around and I find, oh my God, I don't think I belong here, because around me are all those people in black grey suits, middle-aged men, and I couldn't see any people in colour, and I couldn't see any female leaders, female there, and I just and everybody is so they feel like from the same group of people, and I'm different. And I was wearing my favorite bright orange dress that day, and I was very different there. And then suddenly I wanted to run out, and then suddenly somebody called me, and it was a gentleman I just spoke to. He turned out to actually, he's one of the speakers for that day. He was trying to set up his presentation, and he was struggling to get things set up. And he actually called me in a relatively loud voice saying, "Oh, that young lady in a bright orange dress, would you come up and help me set that up?" And I just froze there. And I said, "Okay, I can try my best." But I think probably it would be good to ask somebody from the hotel, or or the event facilitator. And the guy looked at me and said, "Oh, you're not." So it was really awkward silence there. And yeah, so that was my quite a personal experience. The first time I just feel like, although I've got the title, I'm doing the work, and I'm managing the financial position for my organization, but am I really belong to that community? I actually shared that experience with my teams when I come back, and I shared with my peers. And one of the comments I actually got, which is quite annoying, said to me, "Oh, that's people all grey hair, mid-aged man, and in black or grey suits. That's how people pictured of and the CFOs all the time. So maybe like next time you go to conference like that, try to put on your trousers and try to put on black suits, and then make you look like one of them." I really don't. And I know it requires quite a lot of courage, and it requires a lot of guts to actually stay who you are. And I think, being a CFO and being a finance leader, this is my career goal. And I wanted to do that in NHS. I wanted to promote the diversity and add the senior leadership in NHS. This is something I really, really wanted to do. But I don't want to change myself, or I don't want other people, because I may be different to those people already sitting at that group, and I don't want that to scare me back. So it was quite difficult at the beginning, but you need to just to keep remind you, is this something you really wanted to do? If it is, go and do it. Don't let other people define you. Don't let some of your bad experiences scare you away. Just to keep doing it. So I think that would be that's my personal experience, and that's my advice.
Yeah.
Okay, a couple of instances I can think of. I mean, probably one of the first ones was I was invited to a meeting somewhere. Yeah, I'll be harsh. Somewhere up north. So I wandered into not the meeting room, to the auditorium, and said to the person who was, "Oh yes, Mr. Palmer," and they said, "Yes, we're expecting Mr. Palmer." I said, "Yes, I am Mr. Palmer." And again, that was the stereotypical thing happening. I didn't look like Mr. Palmer, Director of Finance, and there were. The other one was also an interesting thing, which, I mean, I think the question alludes to this thing that's called the imposter syndrome, where you think you're being appointed somewhere and you're not good enough for it. And I had that a little bit for a time. I certainly felt really quite under pressure for the first early years of my thing. I mean, one of the things that struck out to me was when I first went to a board meeting, we had this sort of ridiculous thing where we used to talk to each other in titles. So it'd be something like, "Can the Director of Finance please explain what the financial position is for the current month?" And I'd look around and say, why didn't they say, "Arnold, can you explain?" And the truth was that a lot of times boards and directors are actually acting out. They're acting out this fantasy of, if you're senior, you have to talk in a certain way and you have to kind of behave in a certain way. What they all said is very true. One of the most important things about being relatively successful or getting to a further vision is be yourself. You must be yourself. That's the point about diversity. I mean, someone once said to me, if you had lots of black managers all behaving like white managers, what's the point? And what he was really saying was, you bring that extra dimension, and whether it's black, female, gender, disabilities, whatever it is, you bring a certain different light. And I must admit, that's one of the things I felt that I was really found useful, is within your teams, by all means, bringing people who have a slightly different view from you. Because when you do, you'll get a different perspective and you'll make a better decision.
Thank you.
A couple of years ago, I lead the casting team at Stockport, and if anybody with him from costing. They might recognise me, but they're not, because they're all too busy doing reference costs. They should be doing. But a couple of years ago, we submitted a poster abstract for the costing annual conference. And I got an email that said, Hayley, we really like your abstract. Would you lead one of the workshops? The first thing I did was reply and say, you do realise I have a speech impediment, don't you? Because I didn't feel worthy to stand up in front of a room of people and lead a workshop. And of course they said, yes, we do. And I led that workshop, and I've gone on to do more work with the HFMA around costing. And to me, that is as important as standing up doing something like this today. I am promoting inclusivity as much through those forums as I am through a diversity forum. So yeah, I felt an imposter. Why would somebody with a disability, with a speech, stand up, deliver a workshop? Nobody can understand me. I've now done 3 or 4. So I've grown in confidence, and I probably wouldn't do this today if I didn't do that first, because actually that's more my comfort zone, because that's more my area of expertise than talking about diversity.
Just anything, Rikki, or?
Yeah, again, I've got to bring an outside perspective from interacting with the NHS, and I don't know whether this is getting better. My impression isn't it's not. But when I first went onto the care path, I obviously got referred to the gender identity clinic, where I had to see a senior psychiatrist consultant there, and I got a comment from him on one of the meetings. He said, "I'm not sure that you're really serious about this." I said, well, why is that? He said, well, you're not doing anything to change your voice to make it sound more feminine. I said, pardon? He said, so why don't you try to coach your voice into a more feminine? I said, this is my voice. This is how it is. I've raised the pitch a little tiny bit, but I'm a speaker, and I'm not going to try and get into some stupid falsetto voice in order to meet your expectations of what I ought to be if I become a woman. And then I had another friend of mine saying, "Oh God, I got in trouble when I went wearing a pair of trousers," and they said, "Well, why aren't you wearing a dress?" So these are senior people within the NHS who have such a stereotypical image of the way women should be that when someone transitions, it's like, why aren't you now conforming to the stereotype that we expect women to conform to? And I began to realise that some of the time when I thought I was being discriminated against because I was trans, it wasn't. I was being discriminated against because I was female. And I mentioned this to other women. They said, "Oh, God, welcome to womanhood." And I said, no. You see, what I find is that people sometimes don't see the discrimination. I have the incredible advantage that I grew up with all that male privilege. I had raced away in my career, had a really great career, and it wouldn't have happened if I'd been female. There's no way that, because women just didn't progress in the financial service industry. It was very, and still is, a very male-dominated industry. The gender pay gap in the NHS, I can tell you, is really, really high. It's at about, it's essentially, you'll find if you look at the average income for men and compare that to the average income for women, men earn something like 50% more than women. And that isn't because the same job is paid, there's inequality between the same job. Male nurses get paid the same as female nurses. The problem is that very few women get the top very high-paying jobs, and more women get the very low-paying jobs. So when when you average it out over the actual pay, because men take the top high-paying jobs, the consultant jobs, and that you get that inequality. And there is a sense of trying, and you talk about unconscious bias. This unconscious bias. We know that men will tend to mentor men rather than mentor women because they're concerned that if they get too close to women, there'll be all sorts of people thinking that there's some relationship going on, there's some sexual thing. And we talked in my workshops about the issues of sex. So I think we've got some fundamental problems that we still haven't dealt with. Sexism. Anything like well enough. There is still a huge amount of problem, still a huge disparity there, and I think that's one of the issues that's still got to be tackled. We're tending to think it's all about diversity. I know that I often get discriminated against because I'm now seen to be female. Come to a meeting room, and people will ask if I'm allowed to actually instruct people to change things, and because it wasn't a man giving the orders. So that's been an odd experience. And I also think that women don't understand when you're being discriminated against because it's been happening all of your life. You've accepted it as normal. But when I came from privileged masculinity into femininity, I thought, what the hell's going on here? So I hope I can give you that. Don't allow it. Because it's just built into our culture. We just have to stop it. It doesn't need to be big kick off. Just a little bit. No, it's not appropriate. This thing about wearing a dress and being treated. Maybe what we should be doing is say, hey, why is everybody wearing all these bloody grey suits? Come on, put some colour in.
Right, good. So we'll all want to turn up in red, orange dresses, I think, next time. Anyone want to ask anything or follow on from what's been said so far before I put anything else to...
Is it worth just mentioning on the thing about, sort of targets? Because I think a chap mentioned earlier on. I mean, life's, we have to put life in reality. Take NHS with complaints. Once upon a time, people took no notice of complaints. Then suddenly it became mandatory, explain what you're doing about your complaints in every trust. And all of a sudden, it was on people's agenda. And there's something for me, there's a parallel for me around diversity. If people were having to actually explain to the public, to their board members, to everybody interested, to the local people, what they were doing on diversity within their hospital, within their trust, I think it would get a much higher look at. And so, the whole thing about targets and the rest of it, yes, I get it, that sometimes it's hard to measure things. But when people are put on the spot and people are actually being asked to account for what they're doing on a particular issue, it makes a hell of a difference.
I think so. I'd agree.
Can I respond?
The microphone's dead. We've got another one over here. Sorry. Thanks.
I agree with the last point. However, if we look at it and put it in context, when you go into a senior level position within the NHS, there is a number of schemes now called talent management. There's so many of them now. And people are being put through those pipelines, which at the end of the pipeline, that's where selections and those people are being the first people to be exposed or to be given the opportunity. So the question then, which possibly we could look at is, how many of the BME are within that pipeline? And different pipelines. There's the CEO pipeline, the accountable officer pipelines, there's the director's pipeline, there is the going beyond, like that was mentioned. Many are not there in that pipeline. And is equivalent to, it's the same thing like if you don't join the framework in contracting, you cannot get a contract. So if you don't pre-qualify yourself to be on the framework, then you can't get NHS, some of those NHS contracts. It's only those ones. So you're already outside. So the same thing is now happening. And if we're going to really work at it, possibly we want to know and write to those pipelines and say, look, give us how many people over this period you've progressed through your pipeline, and what's the diversity of those groups, at least as a first starting point.
Yep.
Then we know what the succession planning is going to look like in 5 years, and then what the really workload that is there for us, and then to pull people through whatever we then need to do. But at least we can have a conversation to say, look, if you have only 2 BME within your pipeline, your talent that is being pre-qualified, so obviously it's going to take you how many years for you to reach this level of diversification? Yep. So I just want to put that one there.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And it does link back to what I was saying earlier about the push and the pull schemes that we're doing. And so as part of our kind of future focused finance diversity, we will be doing a development program for lower bands to just on the 8, below 8 or just below the 8, that don't get into that pipeline, so don't get a look into that pipeline. So ours is about feeding that pipeline. So absolutely. So working on that. And the other thing I would say was the accreditation process. So the accreditation process now has diversity as requirements in it. So level 1, very briefly, level 1 is do you recognise and know what your statistics are? 2 is do you have a plan to do something about it? And 3, have you enacted that plan? So level 1, 2 and 3 will follow that route. So I think we are doing something, and I think that's a good point, and it is fundamental to where we're going. It's what I said earlier. I don't think this kind of the process whereby the day job just takes over, and everyone I speak to is absolutely on board with the conversation about diversity, and we want to change things, and it needs to happen, and it's important and big. No one I speak to comes and says, "Oh, you're wasting your time. Oh, this is rubbish." But then it's about following that through, making it happen, seeing the change, and I think there's structural change that needs to happen, which comes through the targets. Then there's the sort of cultural change, which is harder and difficult, and then there's individual change, and hopefully we've picked up on all 3 of those elements at some point during the day. I'm probably going to bring things to a close. Did you want to say something? Go for it.
Can I be very honest?
Yeah, go for it.
If you ask about the BME ratio in the latest this national framework, I'm being guilty. I'm on that talent pool. It's definitely not very good.
It's not good.
Yeah, but comparing to our previous cohort, it's much better. Female, male, that ratio looks okay, but definitely not BME. I think just to add on at this point, I think there's another thing, being on that, promoting that diversity in those kinds of national framework and those program pipeline is actually for people on that pipeline, bring something back to their organization as well. So it's a standard message for the wider people or people, they as participants of those talent pool and pipeline, those programs. And then you bring something back, you're learning from that to your organization, to your team, and saying to them, although at the moment the going beyond the band 8 to junior grade is still kind of being developed in shape, will come up soon. Although that's not come up yet, but there's definitely there's a route for people from the diverse background to keep up, and this the current framework is just the first step up. So it gives people some hope. It gives people it help with the communication, because otherwise people would just say, "Oh, there's no hope for us," and we just put our head down and doing what we're doing now. So I think, that's just something I wanted to
thank
add.
you. No, that first point is absolutely true. The statistics are rubbish. We're not in this room having this thing with this program. Doing all this if the statistics were good. The statistics are rubbish. They're rubbish on finance. They're appalling on the talent programs. They're just not very good. And we do need to slowly and incrementally change things. So like I said, I think for me, there is those kind of 3 strands of it: organisational, structural. There's the cultural, which is really hard and really difficult. And I think there's the individual, which is probably even harder. So, a lot of the things when we did the Safe House discussions were around, well, what are one of the barriers? And the barriers we came up with were things like confidence, and things like being not, we talked about not seeing yourself or mirroring and that kind of stuff. These are not easy things. We can set targets, great, but then what about the softer stuff that's really hard? What makes somebody, lack confidence just because they think they don't talk the right way or they don't look the right way or something like that? This is a fantastic panel. Look at this diversity in this panel. It's great. I love it. Great panel. I love this panel. We should have this panel all the time. And Hayley says it's about celebrating. She's here because, it feels good now that you're able to be here. And this wouldn't happen 10 years ago. When I first started my accountancy, too many years ago to mention, I'm a lot older than I look, trust me. I started with PricewaterhouseCoopers, but I grew up in Slough, working class first generation immigrants. I did not speak, I did not look, I did not sound like what the rest of those people were, which were Russell Group University, Oxford, Cambridge types. That was Pricewaterhouse 34 years ago. They're now doing loads of stuff on diversity. Things have changed on brilliantly and moved on quite a lot. And in NHS finance, we are behind the curve. And we really need to make an impact on that. And we can only make an impact on that if the leadership can absorb some of the messages around here, and I'm sure they do in the various forums and groups that are going on. It is taking a bigger impetus and priority, and we need to be behind that. So behind that in individual teams. So when I said, how many of you discussed diversity in your finance senior teams? And I got 2-3 answers. If we meet again in a few months' time or whatever, if you all put your hands up, we're going to start, chipping away at that and making progress and inroads. I think it's the only way we can do it. Hopefully you've taken a lot of tools and tips and thoughts to take back, and you found it valuable and enjoyable, informative as well. There are feedback forms. Please fill those in to make sure we get it right or where we can improve. If you liked it, there's an event on the 7th of November, the celebration event. We're celebrating. We're celebrating diversity and difference. And if you didn't like today, that one's different today. So you'll like that one, okay, if you didn't like it today. All right. But thank you all for coming along. I really, really appreciate it. Fantastic turnout. And thanks to the panel and everyone else who spoke, and to Grace and Sophie. Is there any last comments anyone would like to make briefly? No? Good. Thank you all very much. Safe journeys home.